Yeah, hi everybody. Hello everybody and welcome to the EF Community Standup. For those of you who are just joining us and are new, this is something that we do every 2 weeks, where we basically discuss things that are related to .NET data. We're officially the EF core team, but the Entity Framework core team, but we also discuss other things in the data universe of Microsoft. For example, today, we're not going to be talking about Entity Framework so much. Just a quick round of introduction. So my name is Shay. I'm an engineer on the team. I work a lot on Postgres stuff. I'm kind of specialized in performance and lower level kind of data access stuff like system data. Arthur?
Hi, I'm Arthur. I'm the engineering manager for EF and other .NET data stuff at Microsoft.
Hi,
I'm Frans Bouma. I'm a lead engineer of LLBLGen Pro. And today I'm going to show something about that.
Yeah, I'm personally very excited about today because I've wanted to have Frans for a long time. Frans is a pretty big figure, let's say, in .NET data. He's been around a lot, knows so many things, and I've learned a lot from him, so I'm pretty excited about it. But I think first I'll hand it over to Arthur for a quick, what we call the state of the unicorn.
Indeed. So let me I'm pressing the buttons today, which is scary. So yeah, state of the unicorn. So there's really not much to say in this week. If you don't know, EF Core 5.0 is out now. It's on NuGet. We have about 410,000 NuGet downloads already, which is pretty impressive. Let me clarify, that doesn't mean 410,000 developers are using EF Core 5 because this is NuGet restores, which happens at a variety of times. But it's a good public number that we can show that shows adoption, and it correlates to us seeing high adoption internally as well. So get on that. We're currently the window is pretty much closed for 5.01 bugs now. They'll be coming out at the beginning of December. But if you find issues, we're still fixing them for 5.02. So give it a try. Let us know what you find, and hopefully you enjoy it. Currently, basically, we're planning EF6 and writing docs for EF Core 5. So I said EF6, this is going to be so confusing. We're planning EF Core 6 and writing docs for EF Core 5.
You got to get used to it now. This whole EF6 business.
I know. And we will have a plan that people can look at and give us feedback on. I definitely hope to get that out there by the end of the year. And we definitely want your feedback for what we decide in EF Course 6. And we're also working on some internal quality stuff, adding additional test coverage, updating our build system. We're currently annotating the whole code base for nullable reference types, so that's been an interesting thing on the team and a learning experience for all of us, but it's been quite fun. And just to remind you that we have weekly updates. If you go to, hopefully this will work and it'll bring the right thing up. Yeah, so if you go to, this is just our EF GitHub repo. If you click on issues, we have things that are kind of useful at the top. Currently, we have 2 pinned things, and one of them's the weekly update. The other one is ideas for this show. So if you have ideas, look at that. And you can always jump to the latest update, and this we tell you, what we're doing and the PRs that were fixed this week. So if you want to see, for example, which PRs we had for 501, then they're all listed there, and you can click through them and see everything about what we fixed for 501. So that's basically the state of the unicorn for now. I'm going to pass back over to Shay to continue.
Thank you. So maybe you can put up the list of links, which is something we also do. So we share a bunch of links which have appeared in the last 2 weeks and which are relevant to .NET. You can see them, by the way, on the page. Can everybody see this?
I think I've shared mine instead of yours, haven't I? Anyway, it's there, so let's talk through them.
Sure, no problem. So the first one on the list is what we're going to be discussing today. So I'm not going to talk about too much. LLBLGen Pro is what is Frans Bouma's baby, I guess we can say. So we'll devote quite a bit of time to it. The second thing, which is quite important, is SQL Client 2.1 has released. So this is a minor version release. It's actually quite important. If you look at the release notes, there's quite a lot of stuff that happened there. I remember there's quite a few stability things, so it's really recommended to go use it. One important note is that this thing came out right after the EF Core 5.0 milestone. So if you use EF Core with SqlServer, you don't get this by default. What you're going to have to do is add an explicit package reference to 2.1 in your CS project in order to get this, and it's highly recommended that you do in general. I guess that's all I'm going to say. And then, so JetBrains have, for those of you who don't know, JetBrains is a company that produces really, really nice tools like ReSharper and Rider and all that. They've produced quite a nice tutorial to Entity Framework 5 and new features and stuff like this. So this is a tutorial level thing that kind of gets you through how you set up a new project and how you do, some of the basic capabilities, relationships, inheritance, and so on and so forth. It's really a nice intro into EF Core if you're not very familiar with it. I guess moving on, yeah, the next one is really nice. So this is basically a demo of how to do EF Core from an Azure Functions application. So Azure Functions is basically serverless. For those of you who don't know the concept, that means that you don't have a server somewhere where you're running your application. You're basically deploying your code directly onto a service, and it so happens that you can do EF Core from that as well. So take a look at this. If you're, this also thank you, Arthur. This is also, it happens to do this on Postgres, which is obviously close to my heart. But the specifics aren't really that important because EF Core supports different databases in much the same way. So this is a nice intro to how you go about setting up EF Core from Azure Functions, recommended for anybody thinking about serverless in the cloud. The next one is actually also very timely. So auditing is a problem that many people have to deal with. So knowing exactly what happened, what was saved, what changes were made. This shows a certain approach, like a walkthrough of how to implement auditing in your applications by overriding save changes. It's very timely because I say it's timely because EF Core 5 has several features related to intercepting what happens during save changes. You should probably go to the release notes, anybody who's interested in auditing. There's something called an interceptor for save changes that you can do now in EF Core 5. That means you can basically plug in a piece of code that happens before and after save changes occurs, which is another way. This is an alternative to what you're seeing here, which is another way of plugging into that process and doing auditing or anything else you want to do when doing this. Another approach that's been enabled in EF Core 5 is events, which is, let's say, a more lightweight alternative to interceptors. When you just want to receive event on these things happening, if what you want to do is just auditing, then maybe events is the way to go in that sense. Or of course, this blog post also shows a perfectly workable and legitimate approach as well. Yeah, and I think the last thing, just as a reminder to everybody, with the .NET Core 5 and EF Core 5 release, we had .NET Conf as well. So all the sessions are online. That's quite important. You can go and browse them at your leisure and see everything. This includes the Entity Framework Core talk, which I did with Jeremy Leknes, where we kind of went through all the nice things that in EF Core 5. But take a look. There's a lot of content there. It's very accessible. The sessions are short and they're meant for entry level rather than very advanced. So anybody should be able to take a look and understand what's going on in the world of .NET today.
Awesome.
Okay.
I think that's about it for our links. And with that, I think we're going to just turn to our guest. That's the main event of the day. So, Frans, I'm basically going to turn it to you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about, who you are, where you're coming from, and what you've done. You have the stage.
Well, I've been using .NET since 2002 when it was first released. Back in the day, I created a small generator called LLBLGen, which generated store procedures back in the day. You pointed it to a database and it generated all CRUD store procedures for you. It became very popular, but it was very strict in its feature set. So people asked me all kinds of updates for it, and I didn't have time. And also, it was really not very extendable. But because of all the popularity of it, I decided to build it into a commercial project. And that became, the plan was to build a big store procedure generator, because I was a big fan of store procedure back in the days. And
everybody wasn't, weren't they?
Basically.
Some people still are.
But
Yes.
halfway through the project, I basically hit the wall behind me, because basically it wasn't really possible to generate store procedures from tables without some kind of DSL for expressions, all kind of stuff. So I decided to turn the ship around and build an ORM in a couple of months with a basic designer on top of it, with these are the tables. I want to have entity classes and mappings to it. And from there, I build it out to the designer we will see in a minute. That was 18 years ago. We're still cracking.
So the technology back then was just ADO.NET that you were building on. There wasn't anything else, or was it dataset at that point? Just ADO.NEt.
ADO.NET. Yeah, and I got the idea from the first Visual Studio marketing stuff. It was type data sets and a fancy designer with fancy models and graphics on the screen. And I thought, oh, this is really great. But it was really rigid and not really flexible for a lot of projects. So I thought, well, let's write one of my own generators for this instead, like any developer thinks nowadays. So this is the problem. I write one myself. So that's how I started. So
yep.
So
do you want to give us a look at what's going on today?
So this is the version 5.8. It's the version I will be releasing early next year. I will use this version. It's still in development, but because Entity Framework Core 5 support is in this one, and I will use that. First, I'm going to create a new project. I have to move the microphone thing a bit. And we support multiple object relational mapper frameworks, like our own. And today we're going to use NT Framework Core 5, and we're going to use model first.
What does it mean when you say you're targeting a certain ORM, or should I not ask that? Will it become apparent later?
It will become apparent, but basically the support is that the abstract entity model and all the other models in the designer will be generic for all ORMs will be the same, but the code generated for the ORMs will be specific for those.
I see. That makes sense, yeah.
So I guess it's worth... Yeah,
yes?
sorry. Go ahead.
I will be using SqlServer today. Sorry, Shay. There are several ways to create entities in our designer. First one is the right-click method. If you want to click your right way through the day, you can use this, but it's okay, but it's not really what we developers want. We want to type stuff. So we have a different kind of modeler, and it's named Quick Model. And Quick Model is really meant to model quickly. So there are several reasons why this is in the designer. One is of course, to model an entity model, but also for writing down information you get when you interview a domain expert, because otherwise you have to write it down in a Word document, for example, and have to convert it back to something that your developers can work with. But if you type it in with simple statements, you can immediately give the result to your developers, and they can work with that from then on, instead of using some sort of conversation to translate your notes to the model, to the information they can use. So you can just type in things, and if the modeler recognizes a name of an existing element, it will reuse the element. If it's not there, it will create it. So for example, if I type in a relationship, it will immediately create the two entities plus the relationship plus the navigators on the relationship. And the same thing
I love it when there's a command line interface to something in general. So that's already
So I will create the other entities now. So now I have this simple model, but no fields in it. But I can already show this to my domain expert and say, well, do you recognize these entities in your domain? And likely they will recognize the boxes and the lines between them as something they recognize in their domain. So I will now fill in the fields. So I will change the scope to the entity. And when I change the scope, the elements the editor will recognize will also change with it. So if I type in int ID of type int, it will see there is no ID field yet in customer, so it will create it. But if I again type ID and then a star to mark it as a primary key field, it will reuse that field because it's already there. The types I use here are type shortcuts. So I can just define new ones if I want to. These are shipped with the designer, like string is, for example, mapped to system.string, and int is mapped to system.int32. I can also omit a type, so it will automatically pick string. So for instance, if I'm short on time and I just want to type in the information quickly, I can just do that and leave the model to the developer to fill in the specific types.
So this is something that that is really destined for somebody who's not necessarily. So this is for a modeler, for a person who's not even a developer, right?
Yes, for instance, yes.
They're defining the box and the lines, and then later that's going to be taken up by the developer and actually deployed to a database schema or something.
Yes, we will see that in a bit. But you can also see, for instance, if I go to the product entity and edit it, and I will put it in a. So, for instance, if I now go to the product scope, you will see it will the actual editor for the entity is just another view on the entity object in the project itself. Like the Project Explorer on the left is also a different view on the same model. So the things I type in here, like really have to. I don't have enough space.
So this is definitely your domain level modeling, right?
Yes.
Do you do something? I assume you can configure these things to map to the database in certain ways as well, and that would be less domain specific and more about how you're actually implementing it with the ORM.
Yes, well, we have predefined some types like string, for example, that it maps to Unicode character set. But if you want to have the varying fields, for example, you can specify that in the settings.
But if I wanted to have an inheritance hierarchy here, this view would display it as an inheritance hierarchy, and then we would map it to a TPT pattern or a TPH pattern or something else.
Yes, with two tables, for instance, and a foreign key in between the two primary keys.
Does the designer show that mapping? I ask because it's something that we've talked about a lot over the years, is having a designer that can easily visualize not only your domain model but also the mappings to the database. The EF designer is particularly bad at this, which is probably why we discuss it a lot.
Well, if I may, I can open one, I think. If I, for instance...
Is there any way you can make this a bit bigger, Frans?
The fonts, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
If I see in the sales, I think, purchasing sales. Yeah, so if I... now, if I automatically created the inheritance hierarchies based on the foreign key constraints. So if I open this one and I show this is the inheritance info for the customer entity, and it's two subtypes. And if I go to the mappings, for instance, I see that it's mapped to this one. And if I go to the table, you'll also see this is the foreign key constraint.
Very cool.
So
I see, yeah.
So if I go back to my model, we will see in a bit that is how it's created those kind of mappings. Do I have all the fields now? Oh no, I have to create some order line fields again. And as you can see, it automatically created the foreign key fields based on the primary key you define in the entity on the opposite side of the relationship. So you don't have to define that one because it's the replica of the primary key on the FK on the foreign key side. So
right.
What kind of field? Okay, so now I have this little model, and I can see at the top I have 4 errors, and that because I don't have any mappings yet. The errors you see are coming from the validation service that's run in the background. Various levels of validation are happening. For instance, the model validation, the mapping validation, but also validation specific on the target framework, in this case, Entity Framework Core 5, because not every framework supports all the features in the designer. For instance, Entity Framework Core 3 didn't support many-to-many relationships. So if I have a many-to-many relationship, it will flag that as an error because it won't be able to generate code for that in output. It will also give suggestions how to fix it, and clickable links for you to perform the suggestion automatically or go somewhere in an editor, for instance, to solve the problem. Well, in this case, I'm going to click this one to open the synchronization feature. And this will synchronize the abstract entity model I have in my project to the relational container on the right, which is currently empty. And now it has created tables in the project. We will show, which I will show in a bit. But they aren't.
You haven't created actual database tables here, right?
No.
Or
this is
okay, yeah. This is just the relational model.
Yeah, it's in the project, so it's really disconnected. When I click close, it will say, "Do you want to generate your DDL script?" Mm-hmm. If I click yes, it will generate it, and I can open it in the editor. It also has a SQL editor. So here you see the create table, SQL, how to create the primary keys and the foreign key constraints, for instance.
So this would be the DDL generated by your product, right? Rather than by EF Core's migration feature.
Yes. Yes, this is generated by a template.
Okay.
So you can also adjust it, for instance. And if you really want to, yes.
Question. Do you have so if you execute that script and create your tables and then add or remove something from your model, does it have the ability to generate just the diffs to the DDL, yes, or how do you manage that?
Yes, if I, for instance, create a new field here, like so this is a new field. I have automatically, it says, yeah, you have to map it. So I have to, I can go to the editor and select one, but there's no field yet. So I have to sync again.
And so you're tracking the changes in your model.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So here it says that the field has been added to the table. And do you want to export your change script? Well, if I say yes, it will.
Okay.
And here you see it has altered table.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
So this is something that could be compared to what EF calls migrations in a sense, yes, which is a way to evolve your database schema. I see.
Yes. And I decided to use scripts and not directly modify stuff on the database because DBAs are always pretty strict on that, and they have to rule everything. You have to give them the script.
We have this constant conversation as well with our users. You know, some users really like to, like what we constantly fight about, some users really like to apply their schema changes when the application starts. And then rather than generating a DDL script and, you know, deploying it like, which is the way it should be, right? And then you have all kinds of problems when two applications start up at the same time and conflict and all that kind of stuff. Anyway.
So we used to have 3 marketing terms for EF: code first, model first, and database first. And I think people know what database. Well, the problem with those marketing terms is people don't really know what they mean. But database first, at least conceptually, is you start with a database and then you generate or create your mappings to that existing database. And code first is you create mappings to a database that may exist, but you can also use migrations to to update that database after just writing code. This is an example of model first, which we've never had a good story for in EF, because it really requires a good designer like this, where you start with your domain model and you model the domain, and then you think about both the code and the backend, get both the code and the backend database from that, right?
Yes.
I know Bryce Lamson on the team is theoretically very much in favor of this kind of model first development, but it does require you have a good design tool to do the modeling in.
Yes.
For it to be
basically the entity model you have here on the left side is really the basis for everything. But if you don't have a way to formulate that, to define it yet, then you have to start at the table side or at the code side. It's really no other option.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting to compare. So at least EF Core is you usually do things via what's called a code first approach, right? Your model is your code, right? That represents your model, and changing the model actually means changing C# code, which represents your model, right? So we don't have this kind of additional layer above it, which it's interesting to compare.
Yes, and now I'll show you why it's important to have this model at this level, because you can also derive models from your abstract entity model, for instance, for showing denormalized data in an interface. So if I create a new derived model, and I will choose the DTO class model, you can also choose the document database class model for denormalized documents based on your relational model data. And I will create a derived element for order. And on the left, you will see the elements you can select for your DTO. And on the right, you will see the current shape. And if I want to, say, have the order information and the company name of the customer and the order lines with the product name of the product that is in the order line, if I use just the entities, I have to fetch 4 entities. And if I want to have it in a denormalized way, I can have it in 2 objects in a hierarchy. So I will now select the product name and here the customer company name. And I will denormalize these fields. So I now have this shape. And I can generate code for this DTO plus the projection code that will automatically project the iQueryable from the order to this shape. And we'll see in the service I made, that's really easy, just 1 line of code. So now I'm done with the model, and I will now generate code for this. I will first fix this to the more modern .NET Standard 2.1. And I will add one other code generation task, and it's for model documentation, because there's a lot of information in the model, and for developers, it's often not clear which table a product, for instance, is mapped on, or what types of a field are, or how things relate to each other. So this task will generate markdown files, and you can generate a static site from it using the
Nice.
Very cool. Yeah, so this goes way beyond just an ORM and creating, going to the database. This is a true modeling kind of concept.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if this is now generated a lot of code for us. And I'll first now will generate the static site for this. So now it has generated my static site. And if I open it in the browser that everybody can see, I have this documentation now generated for me. And I can just see all the information.
That's very cool.
Drill down to the relationships, for instance. And because it's generated from the model I will be using for code and my database as well, it's always in sync, because when I generate my new code from my model, this is also updated.
Very nice.
So
this is sort of reminding me of, the Swagger approach for web
Yes.
APIs, where you get, as part of your, defining what your service is and what your APIs are, you also get an accessible, site for calling those things. So it's
Yes.
kind of a self-documenting thing in the same way.
Yeah. Nice that you mentioned it, because we're going to see Swagger in a minute.
That's great.
Because
we didn't even synchronize this before, I swear.
Okay, so we have all this generated code, and how does it look like, for instance? Now we have this, first I'll start with this DTO object. This is the derived element from the DTO model. Yes.
I think there's a question here from a little while ago, which is basically asking about the DTO or not separation. Are you supposed to only use these generated classes with your object relational mapper, or are these the actual entity types that you use in your domain application?
The DTOs are you can use both. I mean, if you want to use the entity classes at the level inside a service, for instance, you can. But if you want to expose objects to a client, for instance, it might be better to use a DTO, because an abstract entity model is great for defining what's in reality, what's in your domain, but a derived element, for instance, like this order, is great for shaping the data in such a way that it's better for your user interface or for your client.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily have to match up.
So there's no real right or wrong answer to that question. It really depends what you're doing and what makes sense for, the particular code you're working on.
Yes.
Awesome.
So you see these attributes, those are also generated by the generator. You can configure this. You can specify rules when you want those on it. So it's just a one-time thing. You don't have to specify on every field. I didn't do that, for instance, which attributes you want. This is the generated link projection for which actually creates the objects at runtime. And it also has a compiled version of it, so you can use it on an existing order entity you have in memory. All the entity classes are simple, straightforward, like you would have written it yourself by hand. The context is also pretty straightforward. The model builder. We generate one extra thing. This is a way to make read-only entities a reality in Entity Framework Core. I think it's still necessary to do this. Our designer, our designer has.
We haven't implemented read-only entities yet. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm curious. What do they do? How does that work?
I have to dig into it, because I use this from a blog post from your predecessor,
Diego.
I don't know, the guy before Diego.
Rowan.
Rowan, yeah, Rowan.
Yeah. Okay, that's getting on a bit then.
he actually wrote this, so it basically creates an error if you try to save an entity that has been marked as read-only.
I see. Very nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and in a designer, you can. Oh, this is the wrong one. Let's close.
Yeah, there's the other side of read-only. I'm just to complete the picture, where users sometimes expect to be, which is more about immutable, where users expect to be able to, like with how you're supposed to do with records in C#9 nowadays, which is to copy across it to create a new instance that's a copy of the previous instance with the modifications, and to have your ORM EF core, detect that and persist that to the database. So that's a different kind of thing. I guess it's more immutable than read-only. Yeah.
Yeah. So the read-only comes from this one, actually. So you can just say retrieve or for a specific entity, and it will generate that in the mapping file.
Very cool.
Okay, so this is all generated. So now we go to the code that's actually, oh, this is also generated because the IDE generated this for me to create the service. And I have a controller here. And this is actually the complicated line I have to write to get the data out of the database and return it from the service. So we fetch an order based on the ID that's specified. I use the generated projection function to create the shape with the related entity data because it's in the projection function. And I will return the first one, which is just one, but there is just one in the order set because of the primary key, but that's okay. And if I build this now, it will run, of course. Where is it? It's here. Here's our Swagger UI that was automatically added for the server, for the service. And if I want to try it out, and I specify 5, for instance, you'll see the query that has been executed by Entity Framework Core, and it will join in the information automatically from the related entities. And as you can see, it will return this JSON from the hierarchical object that has been created at runtime.
We have a question from somebody asking about XML LLBGen proj file. Are you going to move from that?
Am I going to move? Oh, yeah, the project file is XML. And
apparently it creates a lot of conflicts across the team when using version control.
It can, yes. We did everything in our power to make it as much source control friendly as possible. But you cannot always avoid that.
Exactly.
We have been doing some experiments with other kinds of DSLs to store the project information. But because it's a lot of information you have in this project, not only the entities, but also the mappings and the table information, it can get quite big.
Yeah.
So defining a new DSL for that basically also ends up in a lot of conflicts because things are related to each other. So if for instance, 2 users both add an order entity and one is mapped to a different table than the other, and you want to merge that into a single file using source control, it will get problematic.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Shay.
Yeah, one point, everybody hates conflicts and source control, really. Yeah. But some people forget that sometimes a conflict is a good thing, in fact. So in this kind of case, you want that conflict, right? Because the 2 people actually did something which does conflict in the real world. And source control also helps you detect that and know that you have to deal with it. So I'm always kind of, when people, I do understand this and I hate, conflicts just like everybody else, but they have their correct place in the world too.
Yeah.
Yes, and so, I also understand that conflicts in an XML file can be really daunting because it's all angle brackets or what have you.
Yeah.
So John Galway just asked whether or not you are considering will C# source generators help with code generation in the future? I'm putting you on the spot here.
But frankly, I'm in the camp that I want to see upfront what kind of code I have, what kind of code I deal with, and not code that is being generated at build time, for instance. My apologies if I say something stupid because I haven't really looked into source control or source generators that much. But it can help a bit because writing them is really a pain.
Yeah.
What I've seen at the moment, if you, for instance, look at this is just a text file, anyone can read it. I can just add a couple of code
this is a T4 template, right?
Kind of, yes. It's the same principle. So it's just a text file. You can make your own adjustments very easily.
Yeah, yeah.
Code in source generators, it's really more hidden for you, I think.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is a
templating
tool.
seems a better solution in this case, I think.
I agree. After all, I mean, source generators are more about, I have a project in C#, and when I build that project, I want code to be generated. But this is not a C# project that I'm building. It's a tool that I'm using to generate my model. So it's interesting to think about these.
Yeah,
two.
yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, this is what I wanted to show about this.
Awesome. So can we see the old stuff now, the cool, interesting things?
I just wanted to say,
of course.
Before the old cool things, I just wanted to say that take a step back, that first of all, I find this very awesome, and it's definitely something that's missing. So in the days of EF6 and the older days, EF had a designer, obviously, as part of integrated in Visual Studio, and in the EF core days, we've kind of moved away from it, and the team is concentrated on other things. So that's I know that this is important for a lot of people, and to be frank, I'm not very familiar with the old designer, but I have the impression this goes way beyond what it used to do.
Yes. Let's not talk too much about the EF designer.
Okay, I'll shut my mouth. No problem. Yeah.
Okay, the old stuff. Are you ready?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oops, sorry, I could add you to the stream again. There you go.
I had to dig up. How do I do this? No, this is wrong. This is wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, this is the one I'm on.
Can I ask one more question before diving into the old stuff? I just want to make sure. So what we've seen now was the LLBLGen Pro designer. If I'm not mistaken, you also have what you call a runtime, an actual ORM that basically is, you can say, a competitor or an alternative to EF Core, right? Or to link to SQL. And these are two different things which you can. In fact, in the beginning, I was surprised that you can use the designer with EF Core. I mean, but actually, now that I've seen this, it makes a lot of sense. So there's the option of also going with the LLBLGen Pro runtime, which has different features that I'm guessing than EF Core, but the two are not necessarily linked.
No.
Right.
No. If you want to use a designer with EF Core, perfectly fine. If you want to use our runtime, you can also do that. And it's basically born from the necessity that Microsoft was pushing Entity Framework and Entity Framework Core later on as the runtime for database access. So our niche was becoming smaller and smaller.
So this relates to what it's like to try and ship a commercial product in Microsoft .NET world. Yes.
Yeah. So basically, it became a choice between, okay, we stick with our own stuff only and we become irrelevant, or we use what we have in the design front and use it with Entity Framework as well. And I found that the more practical approach, because it's still an abstract entity model you have to define, and users of Entity Framework and Entity Framework Core have the same problem. They have to define a model. So, and
absolutely.
I have the tool for that. So that's why I built a new designer back in 2010, I think, with model first and support for multiple frameworks.
It's interesting because when I started on the team, I certainly had the impression that LLBGen Pro and NHibernate were competitors to what we were doing on Entity Framework. And this was more than 12 years ago. Okay. And I'm not saying that that's what people hire, like VPs at that. I don't know what, I have ideas what they might be thinking, but I'm not saying that they were thinking we're competing with these things. But on the team, we definitely talked about it that way. And I think we're in a much better place now. We definitely don't think that way anymore. And this is awesome, having this out there for people who are using .NET as an option, to have this designer, this very professional designer support in there. You can make the argument that Microsoft should just do this, but then there's other people out there, and if they have the skills and the tools and the experience to build these things, then it makes the whole ecosystem around .NET better. And I think that's all a great thing. And I love that you can use this with different ORMs. that you're not tied into to one thing as well. That's another thing that we've tried to do, with database providers. Don't tie you into SqlServer, but you can still use Postgres just as easily and that kind of thing. So we're in a very different place than when we were back then, and I'm really happy that it still exists and it's around and it's part of the toolbox that people can use. I think it's great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's really night and day compared to the attitude of Microsoft from years ago, where something is successful, let's build it too.
I think we've grown a lot as a company, you could say. I mean, that's weird for me to say as being one very small part of of everything, but from my experience, it's a different place to work than it used to be, with very different attitudes across a lot of things. And it's good for the community, I think.
Yeah, of course. You still have the question, like, why does Microsoft invest a lot of money in ORMs and not a lot of money in visual controls for GUIs, for instance?
Yes.
You can make the case like, they should not invest a lot of money in ORMs because there are commercial alternatives and open source alternatives that are better or also usable. It is what it is. I mean, we can discuss this till the cows come home, but this doesn't solve the problem. So
no, it's interesting because I think you have a very valid point. Why does Microsoft invest any money in developing EF Core? And and I frequently have asked that question over the years, and I think there are good answers to that. I'm not going to dig into the details. I don't think it would be appropriate to dig into all of the details of that. But there are good answers for that. But there's also definitely how much resources does it make sense to put on this, and that's where we then run into the interesting discussions with customers and people in the community saying, well, why haven't you done more work on it? And like, well, on the one hand, Frans is making a very good point. Why are you investing at all? And you're saying, why isn't Microsoft investing loads in this? And it's like, I think we have a balance in the middle that makes sense. And I think we've come to that. But it's a difficult, complex area to figure out what it makes sense to invest in.
Yeah, and it's there already. So even if they decide tomorrow, well, we won't invest in a lot of money anymore, it's still there and it's functional, and people will use it for the majority of cases. So I think that ship has sailed a long time ago. So
I think so. Should we go for a very spicy question from the community? Let's. I don't know if we'll be able to answer it, but this is very spicy. Why would spend so much time in ORM and neglect the driver that uses it to access the first-party product like SqlServer? I don't know if we can answer that, but I would say I don't think we're neglecting it. The team on SQL Client is doing a really good job with a very difficult code base, I think we can say, and they are moving it forward. It's, as we've just talked about, not as fast as some people would like it to be, and maybe some people think there should be more investment there and less in other places. But we are doing it, and Wraith, I know you've been a great contributor to that whole project. So having the community in on there really helps as well. But yeah, we do need to make that driver better. I think that's clear.
You can also use Postgres. It's the future anyway. So
hey, that's not even me saying it. Wow, I'm confused.
I can add Postgres just with a couple of clicks. Anyway,
that's nice.
Okay, so we have 10 minutes left. Let's look at some of that C++ code or whatever it was you're promising.
As well. So okay, let's look at the Stone Age code. Well, this is code I selected because it really shows the power of the record set object. It was the cornerstone of the ADO layer.
So for people, this isn't ADO.NET. This is the predecessor to ADO.NET, which is ADO.
We're not in C#.
Nope.
This is C++.
It would be great if you could make the font a bit bigger in your Visual Studio there on that code, like maybe Control mouse wheel.
No, this is very old.
Oh, it is.
This is not like Visual Studio 2019, right?
I think it's
Where are we?
2003 or so.
I'm not in Kansas.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
You can run this today? This actually runs?
No, this is an old virtual machine from back in the day. When I moved to a new machine, I created a virtual machine of the old one and used that in VMware to maintain old versions.
I'm very happy that you did that.
Machine. This is the oldest virtual machine I have. So this is C++ code for exporting SqlServer data to a text file and also import data from the text file into SqlServer to communicate with an AS400 for a customer of mine back in the day. And ADO was mainly built around a record set object. You can see it as a data set or data table. But it has the advantage that you can just move around a cursor inside the object, change fields, for instance, and just say, persist this to the database without writing any SQL. For instance, this statement says, move the cursor back to the first row, and then you can simply, of course, it will call store procedure because back in the day, a store procedure or nothing. But you could also say to this record set, well, save it to the database and it will update it for you. Also, a nice feature was that you can also persist this record set to a file with one line of code, and it will serialize the data. And back later, you can serialize it back into a record set, connect it to an open connection, and just save the changes. That's really handy, for instance, if you're on a laptop on a train and you don't have internet access. Of course, nowadays, everybody has internet access in a lot of places in the world.
Yeah.
But say you are
Frans,
on a plane.
This is reminding me a little bit of dataset data adapter, where you can also dump the data, like a data table into XML and then load it back and push it to the database again. It's a bit, reminiscent of this.
Yes.
Yep. Well, it seems likely, I'm speculating, that dataset was at least partially
based on
being influenced by this. Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
But at least it doesn't require the stored procedures to be there for you, I guess.
No.
But anyway.
No. So that's.
I remember writing code to manipulate cursors. I was saying before we came live here that when I applied for the job at Microsoft, I definitely didn't want to do any database stuff. And part of that was my experience trying to work with cursors directly in databases and figure all that stuff out. It was a major pain. So I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore.
No, but I still remember when ADO.NET came out and it didn't have record set capabilities, for instance, that you can move the cursor back to the first row and do that kind of magic there.
Yeah, that's true.
It was really a breaking point for a lot of people that they why isn't that feature implemented, and you have to add that to .NET. Of course that never happened, but
I actually remember the same coming from JDBC. So that in the Java database API, there's like a first class idea of, you have a result set and you can move back and forth, or rather there's some types of result sets can do it and others can't. So, and I remember having the same kind of question in my head, what's going on here in ADO.NET? Yeah,
that's basically the same thing. You can upfront say what kind of cursor you want. For instance, if you just want to consume the data back to front to back, of course, then you could say just forward only cursor, and then that's faster than it does some magic behind the scenes.
Exactly.
Do you also want to see the Visual Basic stuff? That's really
sure.
Yes, please.
This is from a content management system I wrote before LLBLGen. I thought it would be very big because we first had a web design company and we wrote a content management system, and everybody should use our system, of course, why not? But I forgot to realize that every web design bureau also had developers who were writing content management systems. So this was a complete failure. But it had a lot of COM components for working with data and store procedures, of course. God, and store procedures.
We really still see that approach nowadays a lot. People who want all their logic to be in stored procedures, and they just call stored procedures, like in 2020. That still exists.
Yeah, I know.
It does still exist, but it's not nearly the same as it was 15 years ago, where if you didn't support stored procedures, you basically got told, go away. Everything has to be stored procedures. Now it's more of a, oh, we're still stuck in that because our DBA is still stuck in that or whatever, but it's a lot less common, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the nice things about this is that because it's a COM component, you can install it in a transaction server or COM plus server on a server on your network, and you can then install a proxy DLL on your client system. And your client can communicate with that DLL, and over the network, it will proxy your calls to the server object.
Yeah.
Like you are working on the server. So it's really a kind of microservice idea.
Yeah, I remember doing that COM stuff in the days. In fact, I have a book about COM with active template library, which was C++ that around here somewhere. ATL, yeah, I like that. That was the best way of doing COM, I thought. But anyway, I wasn't a VB guy.
I still have the plan to create some tests how fast this is on modern hardware.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because I still think because this compiled to native code that it can compete with modern day .NET code. I'm still convinced it is, because I have to test it, of course, but. And no one wants to use this Stone Age IDE, of course.
Obviously.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time here, so I think we should definitely thank Frans for a great presentation here. I learned a lot, and super exciting to see this stuff. So thanks a lot, Frans.
Well, thanks for having me.
Anything else? Anything else? Shay?
I don't think so. I've just had a great time.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and we will talk to you. Oh, so no more EF Core stand-ups or Entity Framework community stand-ups for this year. We'll be back next year with Jeremy probably running the buttons and doing a much better job. So have a great holiday period if you're having one in your area, and we'll see you in January, I think. So bye.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.